pearl is it mean?
It is the center and the circle also at the same time.
Yeah.
It is all there is and all that there is not. Neti, neti.
Okay, I leave you to it. I hope you enjoy, because I know you're not here looking at this thing, right? Like, why would you be here looking at this fucking shiny pearl?
He was telling his story, right?
Need just a little friction to create a pearl.
That he actually got completely disassociated with his family, friends, everyone else. Even food. And he ended up in the hospital, basically. And then he started doing different kind of meditation, which were more materialistic. I don't know what he meant by that. So that's a figure of
When I think of colonization, I'm just thinking to myself in terms of like the indigenous land, how we originally began. I feel like our world has gotten so violent that now people will do anything in the name of violence, in the name of profit. And it's just become so confusing that it's really hard to see who in fact is doing good versus who's in fact trying to survive versus who's in fact trying to stay alive.
So I come here from Nicaragua. I committed a crime. I hurt a bunch of people. That is decolonization.
No, sir. I'm saying when this land over here, because I'm in America, right? Canada, America, Mexico, all of us here, right? All of us here. In terms of the native and the indigenous people.
All right, so she asked me.
Okay, cool. See you later. Have fun, y'all.
Just so you know, you look African as well.
No, I actually don't. He's Liberian and quick eyes. All right, bet.
Cheers on the stage.
MJ Day. I don't know if you want to give Normal a chance to speak. Sounds weird, but
hopefully not.
yeah. So, all right, bet. So Day, MJ. Okay, anything towards the title? Normal.
Apparently, some folks were.
Is your name MJ? Is your name MJ?
People of
Is
color
your
who never-
name MJ?
who were never enslaved.
Is your name MJ?
I think you know the answer to that
Yeah,
question.
why the fuck are you talking?
Because it is an audio app. Did you?
Man, this dumb fucking.
Damn. It's just funny how certain people want to, come into spaces and talk on cultures that they don't belong to.
Why not?
That's a dumb statement, MJ. You don't have to. Oh my God. You don't have to belong to a culture to be able to or be educated.
I have a rule. Hold on, you guys. I have one rule here for right now. And everybody that's on stage has to be alive.
Hello, Steven? Hello? 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 Hello?
All right.
All raise their kids differently, man. I don't think Americans raise their kids uniformly the same either. I don't think American women raise their kids the same either. And I definitely know that the suburban versus rural people raise their kids different. This is all regardless of race, so yeah, my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I never did answer the question because I came in on other stuff, but do migrants raise their children differently? Of course they do. They're from a different country. They got a different set of standards when it comes to children.
Facts, and you're Nigerian, so you raise your children different.
I thought I was Liberian.
It's something like that. You definitely don't look Black American.
Okay.
Why do y'all think y'all look like?
Hold on, what do Black Americans?
Why do y'all think y'all look like? Nah, hold up. Why do y'all think y'all actually blend in like that? Like y'all.
Why do you think you
I've
look
been
different
blending in my whole
than
life.
any other guy do?
I didn't even know what happened.
What are some of the differences between how immigrants versus non-immigrants raise their kids in America? Get back to that.
I got an example. It's an African family that's there across the hallway. If I'm of that same mind, I don't know.
Of course you're not. That's why
Yeah.
it's a silly, stupid conversation.
I mean, that's an interesting characterization.
So we move past of what you mean by knowing in a God, right? So you accepted my explanation of someone saying, "Hey, do you believe in a God?" Then I asked them to define it. Then they define it. I now understand what they mean by believing in a God. I don't believe in it. So now what? You understand that? That's what atheism is.
And so back to my original question then, can one know in a God?
Okay, we're
Well,
stopping.
by your standards, then what I'm hearing is
You
because
didn't clarify what you mean by know in a God.
okay.
I said what I said to help understand what atheism is. So when you ask me know in a God, does that mean the concept of a God? When someone shares their belief in a God, they're sharing their concept of this, what I like to say, a fictional character, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean I know in a God. I know of the concept of what they're believing in. That doesn't mean I know it exists.
He's not going to define it, JC.
Well, I don't know that I have a good definition of it. However,
I get really frustrated with people that use words when they don't know what they mean. I find that not only very silly, but I also find it disingenuous. But that's okay. You are true to character.
no, I mean, okay, whatever. So,
Why do you say no? Why don't you just say yes, Uncle Steve? You're right. I use words that I don't know the meaning of. Yes.
So,
Uncle Steve.
what is
He's everybody's
what does it mean
uncle
to believe in
in
something?
the lifestyle.
Accept the proposition of X. You're accepting the proposition of X.
Accept the proposition of X.
Proposition of X.
All right.
You're
Yeah.
convinced of proposition X enough to believe in it. And then you may further investigate it to gain more knowledge, more information of it, and then possibly gain knowledge, and now you can say you know it.
Well, at what point, accepting the proposition X. Now you got into some formal logic, it seems, right there.
Oh shit.
Would you mind sharing with me what a proposition is?
A statement.
A proposition.
The most knowledgeable person on Clubhouse wants JCC to define what a proposition is.
Well, I mean, pro is before and position is something's place, but
you said you were the smartest person on Clubhouse when it came to words, and you're not only asking for the definition of the word proposition, but you just admitted you use words when you don't know the definition.
It could be a question of said topic. So, I mean, but that's neither here nor there, right? So our understanding of what an atheist is someone who doesn't believe in a God. And the concept of God needs to be understood. Because there are some people who are agnostic atheists, meaning they don't even understand what the term God means because there's no reference point for it. They have no concept of it. They don't accept these concepts of it.
As Buddhist, Taoist, Christian, atheist, secular, they're subconsciously using Confucian ideals within education, self-discipline, their family, their character development. And Confucianism is a philosophical bedrock that later mixed with Taoism, Buddhism, Zen, samurai tradition, and eventually, I think, gives rise to the hero archetypes that we see in storytelling today. You know, you can see traces of these ideas from Sun Wukong evolving into the samurai code, you know, Star Wars, and even like anime characters like Goku, Naruto, Luffy. These heroes go through this intense self-cultivation until their actions become effortless and their character becomes powerful. So, but obviously, I'm wrapping up now. But there are issues here, like, you know, what happens when when authority is wrong, or what happens when your family is corrupt, what happens when this self-cultivation creates a thousand counterfeit people who lack genuine authenticity. Similar to what Sonny was saying about the hierarchy, it's easy to see people, responding in a disingenuous way, maybe. But this debate between Confucius and Lao Tzu, Taoism teaches effortless spontaneity, and Confucianism teaches this trying not to try cultivation. One says let's go, one says let go, and the other says practice it. And there seems to be two instincts within human nature where you have Confucius and Lao Tzu. They're not just arguing, but they're two forces pulling on every individual in every civilization. And we see this kind of manifesting in politics, like right versus left ideologies. It's this desire to shape ourselves and this desire to trust ourselves, which is ironic because they found themselves in this yin-yang duality of where, this all derived from. But the truth, or the hero, is on the line of the yin and yang to achieve that ultimate balance. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Bubs. You gave the initial example of the vinegar taster. You talked about Lao Tzu, Confucius, and Buddhism, and we went through these different positions earlier on as well in terms of tasting the vinegar and seeing it as sour and humanity being flawed versus tasting the vinegar and smiling and assuming life to be perfect. So you talk about this concept of Yu-Wei, the flow state, where actions become effortless. And so what you're saying is that the rituals and rules and conformity that Confucian philosophy adopts is really to enact that there is this concept of Da, which is a halo effect through virtue, charisma, presence, and power. So to get to that stage requires an intense self-cultivation. And so you suggest that in the warring states of China, the generals and the leaders often try to pursue or advocate this Da state in terms of success in life. And so the relationship between Yu-Wei, and Da is that Wu-Wei, if you follow it, leads to the Da state, and life becomes effortless. So the idea of Confucianism, where you are memorizing text, you're bowing, you're arranging everything perfectly, it's about discipline. It's about becoming. It's not supposed to be difficult, but the idea is that the ritual leads to an effortless state eventually, and it leads to pure authenticity. And so I'm going to hold it there. Appreciate you, Bubs, and we'll jump onto our final speaker. Our final speaker is going to be Prakash Benglat. So Prakash is a plant biologist with deep interest in the biology of plant architecture and adaptation, interested in the role of animal and human interactions with plants, a learner and seeker of psychological space, a follower of the forest tradition, meditation practice. So with that short introduction, Prakash, give us your opening statement in relation to what is the philosophy of Confucius and who practices it.
Yes, greetings to
share because I'm not well versed with the concept of Confucius because we've discussed this once before earlier in the same room. But as I was trying to look up and see how, because I followed the literature of Theravada Buddhism and practices, and a lot of these philosophies uh, where the ethics and the spirituality are not separated, right? But later on, you see the the ethics part is brought into governance, right? And so you start to see that there's a separation of what we call as the spiritual practice and the practice of ethics, and they are kind of interweaved. But if you look at several teachers in the tradition of Confucius or Confucianism, there's a teacher whose name is Mencius. Mencius is one of the earliest sages in the tradition of Confucianism. And in his literature, we can see that the, the ethics, which is more of a social order, and what you see as natural order, which is more of spirituality, are not necessarily separated in the core of Confucius or Confucianism, because or the philosophy of Confucius, because examples of how ethics develop. When you bring in the concept of something to develop, there again you start to see that agriculture and plant metaphors start to creep in, and it's easier to communicate the natural rhythms through the lens of plants. And there's a beautiful story that I read where a farmer, he was looking at his crops and he was saying, "Oh, my crops are not growing that fast enough." So he used the strategy of slightly yanking it a little bit, and he did that to all the plants. And after doing all that for the whole field, when he goes back home, um, he told his family members that he did this the whole day, thinking that it'll grow faster. But then his son goes to the field to see the next day morning, and he sees that all the seedlings are actually wilted and dead. So a forced ethics will work only up to a point, after which the natural rhythms of who you are, the spirituality and the core aspect of what the earlier speaker talked about, the separation of Confucius and the Tao, right? So same way, that separation is artificial. And what you would see is as the social frameworks evolve, they'll be given their own unique space, like in the philosophy of Confucius. But in terms of the overall structure, it's blended back into the core of one's own ontic state, one's own being, which is spirituality. And that aligns with the way this can be, pedagogically applied as a tool for, early stage teaching or teaching at different stages of development. But you can reinforce the values, but you allow the natural rhythms to unfold so that it grows into the individual's personality, right? And so there are several examples of that weave into this kind of thinking, and how it aligns with not just social and ethical development, but the natural development of one's own core spirituality and aligning with life as it is, because nature is life, and you can't define life as any kind of social ethical boundaries. Life is just part of nature, right? And so that represents again a spiritual angle. And there are many other stories which talks about life cycle, right? So the best way to explain life cycle, in spite of you having worked hard during your life, established social order and all that, the remembrance of the wheel of life and how that weaves into this, and how do you apply the right kind of effort to master certain life skills and strategies as you follow the social and ethical order. So you still have a personal take into this whole thing. And I think in that sense, you can bring back Confucius not just as and his philosophy as not just as a social and ethical structure, but also a spiritual practice. And I'll stop there. Over to you, Rahman.
Thank you for that, Prakash. So, what you really tried to help us explore was the engagement, the interaction between the ethical structure and the social structure within Confucianism. And so, you argue there is a spiritual component and an ethical component within Confucianism that isn't separated. The ethics focuses on uh, uh, governance, but you put forward this teacher, an early stage of Confucianism called Mencius, and you talked about the ethics, the social order not being separated versus the natural order. The example you give is of agriculture and then also of plant metaphors, that both these things can come together. You talked about the story of the farmer who was looking to grow his crops, and because he felt they were not growing fast enough, for the whole day he went across his field stretching the crops, and explaining back to the family, and then the next day, all the crops were wilted and then dead. So there is, there is ethics, but there is also a natural flow, and so there isn't this separation. Um, so you argued that forced ethics only work only to a point, and then the spirit must flow, and so the overall structure must be blended back to one's own being. So we must, reinforce values through the natural rhythms that flow into one's individuality. The social and ethical development, you argue, must be aligned with the natural life cycle. Um, so, um, so thank you for that, Prakash. So that concludes our round one. Um, and so let's reset the room, and then we'll jump back into round two.
Yeah, this is the Seeker's Mind, and tonight we're exploring what is the philosophy of Confucius and who practices it. Well, we've heard perspectives from philosophers of Taoism, spirituality, Confucius, personal cultivation. A theme that seems to kind of resonate with me is that Confucius sees lessons as sort of what we do. He's more interested in how we live, how we think freely. So I look forward to seeing where this goes in round two. This room is on replay, by the way, so if you hear something you like, please revisit it and share it. If something resonates from one of our speakers, please follow them. And we're here every Monday night. And again, we're talking about what's the philosophy of Confucius and who practices it. Thanks again for all of our round one shares.
Awesome, thank you for that. So, let's jump into the conversation in a little bit more depth. It was definitely interesting to see what seemed to be what Confucianism is all about, what Confucius was about. There seems to be this component of responsibility, of ritual, of ethics, and then there is this aspect of Yue and Da flow, and so there is the four all the speakers. So Confucianism seems to be a system of a sort. But what I took away from Sunny's position was that she did leave China and then she did go to a Western educational system where she was able to kind of pursue her interests. So, what is the role of the individual within Confucianism? That's my question to the stage. Let's go across to Nick first. Renee, Sunny, Bugs, and then Prakash. What is the role of the individual within Confucianism?
Yeah, I think the role of the individual in Confucianism is similar to other spiritual systems in which the individual must harmonize with the collective, with the cosmos. There's the concept of Tien or heaven in Confucianism. There's also the concept of Chang or Chang, sincerity. And through Chang, it allows one to align with these heavenly principles or Tian Li. And in this way, it mirrors a lot of other spiritual systems, whether it's Taoism and harmonizing with the Tao, whether it's Buddhism and Hinduism and harmonizing with Dharma. It seems to be that the role of the individual is to find their place within a productive society, intellectually understanding themselves, their fellow man, nature, the cosmos, and harmonizing with this divine organization, whether it's framed divine or not, spiritually or not. It seems to be that there's these ordering principles that one must align themselves with in order to become the most effective human. And in that sense, I think that's the goal of all spiritual seeking, is to try to find the greater patterns in which the individual should harmonize themselves with in order to find wisdom, beauty, inner strength, the cultivation of principles that allow for one to become the best individual that they can possibly be. So that's how I'd answer that.
Awesome. Renee?
When you look at Confucianism as an educational system, it has two fulcrums, you can say. On the one hand, indeed, what Nick also says, this dedication to the community through its ritual application of social rules, the way how you respect your fellow beings, and your hierarchical relationship to them in that sense. The other side is that in the educational program there is this maintenance of historical continuity on the one hand. On the other hand, Confucianism prizes individual qualities very highly. So in some ways you can say that Confucianism praises individualism higher than the West does. We are individual in the sense that we want to be different from others, but they are more, Confucians are more individualistic in the sense that they want to cultivate themselves to the most personal that they can be in their relationship to society. And then you see that many Confucians somewhere in their life also enter either a Buddhist or a Taoist or both paths to complement that. That's also why at a certain point during the Song Dynasty you had a development of Neo-Confucianism where they tried to integrate Buddhism and Taoist teachings inside a more spiritual inclined Confucianism. And before that time, or in the Tang Dynasty, they tried to make a sort of a church out of Confucianism. But primarily, of course, it's an educational system. So this individuality is on the one hand subservient to the community, but on the other hand, it also serves to escape that community by enhancing the best of your individual qualities. I think that's about it.
Thank you for that. Bubs? Sorry, Sunny. Let's get Sunny. Bubs.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, actually, I think like Confucianism is um, it's not like view individual, that individual. To be honest, I still feel like it has everybody like needs to play a role like under Confucian society. Basically, it's defined by your society, the traditional like 5 relationships, right? Parents, child, ruler, like subject, this kind of stuff. I mean, also like I want to point out like one thing, the filial piety about like to our parents and stuff. I think this is a really interesting bit because as my personal experience, I feel my parents and my grandparents they practice it really well. But to our generation, I think we replace the word like because in Chinese it's as 孝顺, fulfill pity. 顺 means like obedience. Really listen to them. Although like sometimes you don't agree with them, but you don't fight. But like I think for us, our generation, we fight a bit. Like we think we don't obey that much, but we respect our parents. However, I think I have another thinking now about this fulfill pity. Because like when we I think for a lot of times, for me, I think also my friends, we don't fight that much again. Like after like Shakyamuni, I think they find he find the middle way after going to like both sides. But that middle way is like not fighting that much, but also obey to some extent. I think yeah, that's a really interesting thing to me about um, how should I play individual role like as a child, in this like Confucianism society. I think it's not this way and that way. Yeah. Also, like it's really interesting. Um, the speakers mentioned loads of like examples just now. The vinegars, also the I just realized um, I was actually surrounded by all these kind of stories like in China, but I just didn't realize it, and I didn't know how to use English to explain it. But I think you guys talk really like open my view of Confucianism. Oh, how it's already sometimes already going to my blood. I think that's really perspective, really special perspective for me. I mean, thank you guys. Yeah, that's it.
We definitely like to bring special into the room, but the individual and Confucianism.
Hey, yeah. So my idea, how I'm thinking of it, is the individual is not something that's isolated necessarily, and it's not, and he or she is not a servant to the state. The individual is where order is supposed to emerge from, and you're basically a signal that you're. If we jump back into Wu Wei and the Da, I'll layer that in a second, but you're giving off that you're on the right path. So if you want to fix the world and make the world a better place, the Confucian idea is to cultivate yourself and to reach this Wu Wei through practice and cultivate your Da. And the thing is, like I said before, the individual should start with radiating their authentic energy and their uh, so basically you're trying to get to a point where you start off with harmonizing your family, your community, and then your state, and then to the civilization, and that will emerge from you. So when you are in Wu Wei, when you're completely at ease and you're just in this flow state, you're going to be more attuned to what you're interested in, or what your curiosities are, or what fears you need to tackle. Your body is like a tuning fork. It's always sending you emotions and thoughts of things that you need to go look at or things that you need to go conquer. And a lot of people hide in fear, anxiety, depression, whatever you want to call it, good, bad feelings. But this God or the Tao, whatever you want to call it, is trying to call you forth on a journey to step up and go after these things that you're interested in, and attack things that, find the gold underneath the dragon. So, when you start with just, cleaning up your house, or, cleaning up your room, like what Jordan Peterson or someone would say, you want to start from the very foundations of where you are, and then once you grow from there until eventually you reach a higher amount of people to influence. And in your is your own authenticity. It's like your own personal um, aura that's connected to you personally. And this is when you'll start seeing your humor, your special talents, or these different things that make you you. And people are very good. We subconsciously are able to detect when somebody is, bullshitting you or not being their complete self. And you can tell when someone's being genuine. And that's what is like a radiating force that pulls people in. And this is how, the idea is to cultivate these his idea was to get these rulers and these people who could lead the society into the next era. And I think over time, like any religion or philosophy, it gets bogged down by a lot of rituals, and you can see this in Christianity, Islam, whatever, things just get over saturated. But the overall arching idea here is to create people who can lead us to the next evolution, basically.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Prakash, what are your thoughts on the individual and Confucianism? Can you hear me? Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Prakash, that can't hear me. Okay, Prakash, you have thoughts on the individual and Confucianism?
Yeah, I think all the speakers, already have kind of saturated that aspect. So I can, contrast it by looking at this concept of self, in the contemporary Western thought. The individual is the epicenter of society, right? And the emancipation or the betterment of the individual gives rise to social orders, right? But if you look at a lot of the older cultures, the individual is always a part. It's a relational self all the time, right? So you have to weave that architecture into how you think about, societies of those times, and those older societies still retain that aspect, even though the Western thought has influenced, along with the economics and other ways of how the world operates, this Western individual and the collective, the individual having a strong representation, a strong voice. And you can see, if you go back in time, there were kings and queens, and so the individual and the democratic way of how the society works now is now pitted against those kind of philosophies. So in a way, when we discuss about Confucius, for Sunny, it is her own heritage. For us, it is just a philosophy that we hear through the lens of, scholars and practitioners. But what it does give us a frame of reference to shift from this kind of very monopolized or individual, very focused way of Western thinking, and be able to infuse some of the other philosophies into how we look at, ourselves. As the world is becoming more and more Western, exploring these amongst the young minds might give us an opportunity to shift. And so we have to thank scholars like Rene and Bubs and Nick with his Seek and Sunny exploring in their own ways as thought leaders, because they can contribute
this aspect of the relational self, which now embodies a very different philosophy and building communities around that. Right? So this is a way of counterbalancing what is the driving force of the society now, which is mainly a Western individual based, with because the governance has shifted in that direction. But in terms of interpersonal relationship and the journey towards the individual, which is where the spirituality comes, and there are many other traditions which, when you go into the core spiritual aspect of who you are in many cultures and traditions, the individual is not. The individual is seen as only as a part of the collective, right? And it becomes a very communal worship, right? When I say communal, what I mean is it's a collective activity. And in a lot of societies, that is how you gain your identity to begin with. And then through that, you find your own individual aspect. So weaving that framework back into what we were talking about in terms of the philosophy of Confucius, it gives us another way of connecting the social ethical aspect to the spiritual, where the individual is of prime importance. And now the individual has the clarity with reference to how they act within the community. Right? So it gives us a reframing of the individual and the collective. That's my take on it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Prakash. Yeah, that's an interesting point and perspective. We could be talking about the individual not showing through in a Confucianistic philosophy, but obviously that isn't the case from what has been said in the room. But also, it could be that the philosophy of the individual hasn't got scope for the collective, the responsibilities to the collective, to the community. It doesn't go far enough when it comes to the individual. Very interesting. Thank you for that. So I wanted to kind of go into Confucius' philosophy on the individual being evil. I'd like to unpack that a little bit more. Where does that predisposition of the individual being evil emerge from, Renee?
Yeah. If you look at Confucianism as a whole, we see it very often as a philosophy or as an educational system for the state, but technically it is a way of dealing with the way how the worldview was constructed in the Warring States period and before. And people tend to forget that Chinese culture has always been an animist society, so Confucianism should also be seen in that context. And Monte actually described it the best, and you see that echoed in Confucius. Confucius, of course, didn't write anything down, only through third or fourth generation people we know things about his thoughts, just like with Jesus. And I think Mohammed is the only religious figure who ever wrote something down himself. But Monte described basically a sort of hierarchy of beings, which we later also see back in the Tibetan forms of Buddhism, although that's also mingled with Indian ideas. But you see it also in the folk religion of China, where the world is populated by all kinds of beings. And these are generally classified in 6 kinds, or 6 different realms, or Confucianism says there's basically 3 realms of existence. There's the heavenly realm with its own kind of beings, and there's the water realm with all kind of beings, and society, human society is part of that water realm. And then there is the earth realm with all kind of beings. Later on, when China developed its idea of hell, this was the place where you went to as if you died, because everybody, according to Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, goes to hell. And at that moment, when they are in hell to purify themselves to be ready for the next life. They're being accompanied by guardians, which are then demons. But there's all kind of classes of demons, and many of them they live in all kind of realms. Also in the water realm, they roam around and they have their own society as a whole. And they can even become immortals at the same time. And human beings, within both modes and Confucianism, especially in the form of the teachings of Sun Tzu, they suggest that people are not born as good beings, but they have the capacity to be good. So Sun Tzu, especially with all the boringness of everything that he wrote, because he wrote a lot, and it is very, how do you say, just saying statement after statement. It's not very pleasant, not a pleasant read. But one of the things that he said is that when we are born, we are not naturally born good. There might be good people, but most people, when they are born evil. And you can see on the greed in the child to feed itself and to be a sort of a social parasite. They eat their mother in the womb. When they come out of the womb, they are continuously demanding attention. They need a long time to become independent, and if you leave them by themselves, they become basically feral beings. And at the moment when you look at them, at people from that perspective, you see that you can't leave people alone. If you don't create society as an educational structure around people, only their worst sides come out. And as a result of that, they also say that because of the training, you basically make a transition from being demonic in nature towards humane in nature. That's the run part, actually, where you become a socially cultivated person, and where you can also pursue your individual qualities, both for the community and for yourself at the same time. So this demonic side is what you're born with, and you can see that with a lot of people when they do not try to compose themselves as mature beings. They are mostly opportunistic, right? And when I was living in a monastery in China, my teacher to the point said like a Wu Wei is a form of opportunism, in the sense that you want to live without any effort, but you want to also see your opportunities in the principles of Tai Chi. Tai Chi as a lifestyle, as a philosophy, is based on that idea where you can say you seek goodness, right? But you also have to take your opportunity to get there. So by nature is entropic, so it doesn't really bring you to goodness. You really have to seek that at the same time. And to understand your own demonic side is therefore very important, because you have to see that when there is opportunity to grow or to achieve something, if that is going to bring you to your demonic side or to your divine side, and your human side is somewhere in between. I think, yeah, that's more or less what I think Confucianism contributes there.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to have that analogy of the tasting of the vinegar, where one philosophy is talking about a sour taste, and then the other philosophy is talking about smiling. And so, if I'm understanding it, what we're saying is that the Confucianistic philosophy is looking at the individual as being inherently evil or selfish, and so a framework of education is required to give.
For a moment, Raymond, because it's not all Confucianism who thinks that, but it's specifically the branch of Sun Tzu who thinks that. So Mencius and Sun Tzu, they're like two opposite sides. The one says people are by nature good, but they need education to stay good and to become better. And the other one, Sun Tzu, says people are born evil. They're not actually demonic, not necessarily evil, but they're born demonic. They can turn into evil, but if you give them good education, they become humane.
So, what are the principles of education, Nick, in Confucianism? Confucianism. Like, what is education to Confucius?
Yeah, in Confucianism, like I was saying earlier, there's this concept of Tian in order to align oneself with. One can achieve this state of Dajunza or ideal being through ritual, which is Li, music, there's archery, charioteering, things like that, calligraphy, mathematics even. The five constants or cardinal virtues, benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and integrity, sincerity, are typically seen as the things that are embodied for those who want to personify this Tea of Li, this heavenly, cosmological, celestial mode of being. On another spiritual note, though, and on the concept of heaven and hell and this duality, while in Confucianism this idea of Tian is more ideological, it's a consciousness-based mentality, it's not directly pertinent to an afterlife. One of my favorite ways to look at that duality is Rabia al-Adawiyya in Sufism, and she's famously depicted with a torch in one hand and a bucket of water in the other. When she's asked about her actions, she stated she wanted to use the torch to burn down the rewards of paradise and the water to extinguish the fires of hell. And in this sense, she wanted everybody to love God for God's own sake. And so for me, I feel like that kind of embodies this duality, realizing that we shouldn't do things out of fear of punishment or expectation of reward, but instead just to be the best individual that we can be for ourselves, our communities, our societies, nature, understanding the cosmos through education, ritual, initiation. So I guess that's how I would answer that.
Thank you for that. Bobs or Sunny, you guys have any thoughts on
say that about 30% of the population is atheist, you are wrong.
What percent of the population